The Chrysos Heirs, the faction of flamechasers tasked with saving the world against all odds, yet destined to fall one by one until one is left to carry the burden alone. Such is the prophesized fate of those who chase the flames. But unbeknownst to a huge part of the Star Rail community, we have seen these heroes more than once, celebrated their victories and mourned their tragic deaths. And I'm sure you Star Rail only players have been getting bombarded with names such as Elysia, Kevin, or even Pardophilus and Griseo, and you have absolutely no idea who these people are and why people keep bringing them up. Well, in truth, we have played these games before in the very game that Yang is from. We experienced the Flame Chase journey, and that ended just as tragically as this one. And it just so happens that nearly every single Flame Chaser of Amphorius has a counterpart in Honkai Impact 3rd in their own way. Admittedly, I have made a video about this already, but that video is 3 months old, and way more information has dropped, especially with Hysilens and Cerydra right around the corner. I also said in that past video that I was going to update my findings in the future, and now is that time. Because this is the Flame Chasers' true identities revealed. Okay. So in the past few days, I've been posting about Hysilens and Cerydra and about who their characters are based off of, and just looking at the responses made me realize just how many new people we have around here. And yes, just so that you know, I am crazy, but this is one of my saner takes, trust me. This will all make sense soon enough, because all of our beloved Chrysos heirs do in fact share similarities with the moths of Honkai Impact 3rd. It's just that the information that links them together isn't as easy as just looking at Phainon and saying, oh, hey, that's Kevin. A lot of them are on the deeper side and require a lot of digging. So strap in, because we are going over all 12 here, so let's start off with the Deliverer, who mimics the Deliverance, of course, Phainon, who I'm sure you all know is the ranked first of the Flame Chasers, Kevin Castellana. And where do we start with this guy? Let's go over the history real quick. Quick history lesson. You see, put simply, the entire purpose of the Flame Chase was to beat back a force that was destroying the world called the Honkai, and humanity, being driven to near extinction, put their faith in a project called the Mantis Project, standing for Massively Augmented Neotech Integrated Soldiers, who were surgically fused with powerful Honkai beasts, thus making them super soldiers. Super soldiers that were trained to fight Hersher, and Hersher are basically emanators if you think of the Honkai as an Aeon. They're very similar concepts. Anyway, after a huge accident involving one of the said Hersher, only 13 Mantis soldiers survived, and Kevin was the second strongest. However, he wasn't always the dark, brooding, and depressed guy we know him as today. In his younger years, he was quite the happy, popular, and confident guy. But just like the Black Tide took everything from Phainon, the Honkai took everything from Kevin. And because every single Mantis soldier has a side effect from their surgery, Kevin's made his body temperature permanently below 0. And though this made him stronger because he alone was able to wield the flaming sword called the Judgment of Shamash, the Honkai took something from him that ended up being the first part of his humanity. And this part of his humanity was his ability to make physical contact with other people, namely his wife, Dr. May. No relation to Raiden May or Raiden Balsan Mori May, however, she was quite the mad scientist, so she has Ruan May written all over her. And yes, before you correct me, it does say that Dr. May was Kevin's lover, but come on, that's his wife, let's be honest here. Anyway, just like the Black Tide took everything from Phainon, the Honkai continued to take more from Kevin, as the love of his life was infected with Honkai poisoning and she tragically passed away. And this broke Kevin. This woman was so important to him that he pretty much lost all connection to the world and went cold. And with the world crumbling around him and only cities remaining of the entire population of Earth, the only person Kevin cared about left him with two things: a child and a mission: defeat the Honkai. And as a person that doesn't age because of said surgeries, Kevin easily outlived this child. And because of these events and Kevin's life literally falling apart, this is how Kevin became the Deliverer we know him as today, which is exactly how Phainon is becoming the Deliverer as he is prophesized to be, slowly having everything and everyone he cares about taken from him, as he can do nothing but grit his teeth and move on until there is nothing left but the mission: bring forth Era Nova. Also, Hoyo is subtle as a brick for making him do this little bat flick when we first met him, because Kevin's first weapon before the Judgment of Shamash was a bat. It's the Honkai protagonist weapon. So Phainon is very much Kevin, and his journey as a character very much drives this home. However, even though there are many flame chasers on this list that share absolutely no visual similarities with their Honkai Impact 3rd counterparts, we do have the second of the flame chasers and the true leader, Elysia, who is none other than Cyrene, quite obviously. And it doesn't get more obvious than this. That is literally her face. But this is actually quite deeper than you think it is, because Cyrene has a very high possibility of being from beyond the sky, which would match Elysia because Miss Pink Elf was an alien. She was in fact born a Hersher, but just like her signet ego suggests, she had an ego. You know, the whole id, ego, superego thing, which makes all the sense because she was part human and part Honkai. A normal Hersher does not have a superego to tell them not to crash out because the Honkai feeds off of negative emotions. But this is precisely what made Elysia so unique. Her human side was very much intact, meaning that she had an ego, and this ego made her fall in love with humanity and eventually sacrifice her life to give humanity a fighting chance in the future against the Honkai, making sure that all future Hersher would be like her and at least have a chance to remain human, thus turning the Honkai's emanators into weapons for humans to wield. So Elysia is the reason why Kiana, Mei, Bronya, and even Welt Yang are still alive to this day, which leads me to think that Cyrene will do something similar with the Amphoria's cycle reset, possibly giving her life to give the Chrysos heirs another chance at life, thus bringing everyone back, and this is why Hysilens and Cerydra are here. But that's a theory for another time. She also made a small version of herself at some point, just like Cyrene and Mem, and she also loves to call things romantic. And what was the first thing we heard Cyrene say again?
Of course, this will be a romantic story like none that has come before. You think so too, right?
Yeah, that's Elysia. This woman speaks in audible tildes, and we know that anywhere. Next up on our list is the third of the flame chasers, Apanya, who is undoubtedly Aglaea. And this is where you're gonna have to hear me out, because though they look nothing alike, they do share so many similarities. Now, Apanya's mantis ability was definitely one of the most terrifying because she had telepathic future sight and even mind control abilities. But she made sure to be as gentle as she could while using them, because her abilities kind of work like Kafka's, where Kafka says listen to me to trigger the mind control and Apanya says please. And she mostly used this to give people hope for the future in their dying world, just like Aglaea used her golden threads to read minds and protect the holy city, like a nun. But she also used her future sight to predict Wright and May's death, and May had to go to great lengths to prove this wrong, just like how Aglaea death faked us, and we survived as well. And to take this even further, these two have more in common than their dead looking eyes that gaze into your soul, because the romance titan that Aglaea worships, Nestia, is depicted as a butterfly with golden patterns on its wings, and it just so happens that Apanya's mantis modification gave her golden butterfly wings as well. See? You gotta do a bit of digging, but it all makes sense. Apanya also served as a mother figure to Griseo after she lost her parents, just like how Aglaea raised Cipher. Oh, and her signet was discipline, by the way. And let's just say that I wouldn't have the discipline to deal with kindness for 1,000 years. Enough said. And here's a part of the list where I can add in a lot more information to my previous list, because in the fourth slot is the idol flame chaser, bearer of the signet of gold and the flame chaser source of funding, Eden, who I believe is Lady Hysilens. Now, a lot of you said, oh, Nova's lost it now, but joke's on you, I lost it a long time ago, because in fact, even though they look absolutely nothing alike, and Hysilens looks more like Sparkle, Lingsha, Fushi, and Nuwa, Hysilens has so much to do with Eden if you look just beyond the surface. Because first off, Hysilens' core flame is called the Chalice of Plenty, and Eden's signet was represented by this chalice that she always has with her, probably because of her drinking problem. A drinking problem that Fagusa, the ocean titan, also had, because according to the mythology, they are a capricious and pleasure-obsessed god that sees the oceans as their place of alcoholic. revelry. But that's not all, because as an idol, Eden is themed around music, and Hysilens is the only flame chaser depicted that has anything to do with music. She is holding a violin. But I'm sure you get why I call her Eden now, right? The music elements and the chalice are telltale signs that cannot be ignored. That is literally Eden. And just like Flame Chaser number 4, number 5 couldn't look less like her Star Rail counterpart, because the inventor of the Flame Chasers, Vilvi, bearer of the signet of the Helix, is Tribbie. And even though, again, they do not share any visual similarities, they are exactly the same. Because, you see, Vilvi's mantis ability allowed her to split her personality into 8 or more different parts. And I'm sure you already know where this is going. Because just like her, Tribbie, as the demigod of passage, split herself into 1,000 versions of herself. The only difference being that Vilvi shared a body and they all took turns. And the chaos is exactly what you think it is. Because her personalities were as follows: the conductor, the great magician, the expert, the flavorful, the Kevin killer, the looking down upon the stars one, the pure evil one, and the Vilvi of the Helix, with the Helix being the original one. But of all of these, it just so happens that only 3 primarily controlled the body. And you would think that this is where the similarities with Tribbie ends, right? Nope. Because Vilvi specialized in making weapons of mass destruction, mainly bombs. So if you're wondering why the 3 little Tribbies love to blow stuff up and perform miracles, now you know why. Because the magician and the expert did it all first. Moving on to the 6th flame chaser, we have the mad king of aura farming himself, Calpis, with the signet of decimation, who is clearly Mydei. Let me explain. Actually, I don't need to. Look at this. Do I even need to say anything? I will anyway, because this is funny. Calpis was a near unkillable beast of a man, but behind the mask was in fact a man with a heart that was indeed human. Because even though Calpis reveled in the maiming and killing of all who stood in his way, he managed to still have compassion for his comrades in arms. And trust me, that's saying a lot, because I don't think you would expect this face to have any shred of compassion. But it's there. He cares. He sets himself on fire, but there's a human under there, I promise. But being near unkillable isn't his only similarity with Mydei. He can apparently cook really well. And so does Mydei for some reason? Why is this only said here? We need a Mydei cooking event, please. The Kremnoans may have no words in their dictionary, but hey, let them cook. And of course, just like Mydei, Calpis was the frontline fighter of the Flame Chasers. The similarities are pretty cut and dry here. And in the 7th spot, we have Sue bearing the signet of Bowtree, and yes, apparently that's how that's pronounced. I got it wrong the last time. And this is thankfully where the visual similarities return, because just look at him. Sue, Alhaitham, Anaxa. I swear, Hoyo loves this design so much they made a female one, and that's why Vita exists. Not really. The elements Sue and Anaxa share are very upfront, because not only are they both scholars and not fighters, but they also have a very nature-centered aesthetic, because Sue's signet was represented by a leaf and Anaxa's core flame is from the Reason Titan, who was a tree. So short, sweet, and simple for this guy. It's kind of just right there. And unfortunately, despite all of the Flame Chasers so far having very strong connections, the 8th and the 9th one are the weakest ones, so brace yourself. I'm gonna be reaching a little bit here. Because Yae Sakura would have to be Hyacine, and besides having pink hair, they don't really have much in common. Unless you want to count the Shrine Maiden Yae, which is similar to Hyacine because Hyacine is a sky priest, but they really kind of took the barber design and just ran with it, didn't they? They also both died trying to protect people, but that's kind of something all the Flame Chasers do, so very weak connection here, but they do have pink hair. There's that. And at the 9th spot, we have Cosma with the signet of Daybreak. That is the only male left, so he's gonna have to be Terravox. And unfortunately, there is not really much notable about Cosma besides his tendency to be soft-spoken and overthink everything he wants to say to the point that it comes out all wrong. Which is kind of sad, because if Terravox is supposed to represent Cosma, then they made poor Cosma a mountain dweller. And that means he talks like this.
Far too plain this vessel is, not worthy of you. Do you still insist
They did this man so dirty. But that's really all that stands out about him. He doesn't really get much screen time. Anyway, since there are only 12 flame chasers in Emphoria so far, there is bound to be an odd one out, and that is sadly Mobius, because even though the world is shaped like an infinity sign, and that is in fact Mobius's signet, the Snake Lady doesn't match anyone so far that we've met. So we're gonna have to skip her and get to someone who matches up way better than the previous two. And that is the 11th of the flame chasers, bearing the signet of the stars, little Griseo, who has a strikingly similar hairstyle to Castorice with the two twin tails in the back, both wearing a white dress, and they fight in tandem with a summon. Griseo has her summon suit of armor named Mr. Knight, just like how Castorice has her dragon Pollux. And they're both wearing flowers, of course. And as ironic as it is for Griseo's Star Rail counterpart to be Castorice, who is themed around death, Griseo did end up surviving in Honkai Impact 3rd and is still alive today. She's an adult now. Sue is technically alive still in spiritual form, and there's also one last survivor. None other than the 12th of the Flame Chasers, bearing the signet of vicissitude, the immortal Phoenix herself, Fuhua, who I believe is in fact Cerydra.
But no, that's clearly Farina.
Yes, she looks like Farina, but that's so surfaced. You gotta look a bit deeper than that, because these two actually share a lot of similarities. First, we gotta talk about the dragon wings, because that is an iconic part of Fuhua's mantis augmentation. Also, the second is the word vicissitude. You see, this word means the change in circumstances, typically one that is unwelcome or unpleasant, like going from innocent to guilty in a court of law. Pretty fitting for the demigod of the law, don't you think? And there is something strange about Cerydra, because even though she is rumored to be dead, the power of law never fell in Emphorius. And this is the most Fuhua thing ever, because you see, Fuhua does not die when she is killed. In fact, she dies when Otto shoots her in Honkai Impact 3rd, but she transferred her consciousness into a feather and then later got her body back, thus cheating death. To be honest, Fuhua is the most Chrysos heir-like out of all the flame chasers I've mentioned so far, because she doesn't age and nearly lost her humanity because she lived so long. She might as well have golden blood. And as for her connection to the concept of law, after the fall of the flame chasers, Fuhua awoke from cryosleep and became what people referred to as the Celestial, a demigod-like being who lived in the mountains and only descended to slay the forces of the Honkai. And if someone was infected, she alone was the judge, jury, and executioner of said individual. Her word was law, and she was a bit of a tyrant. But in her defense, after watching humanity die out, I don't think she was willing to take any chances. And finally, the 13th and weakest of the Flame Chasers, bearer of the signet of Reverie, who is beyond a shadow of a doubt Cipher for both aesthetic and lore reasons. Not only is she a thief, scamming, street rat cat girl that wears a hood, but she also didn't want to become a Flame Chaser, just like how Cipher never intended to be a hero. Pardophilus ended up unknowingly signing up for mantis surgery and just awoke part cat. And Cipher didn't intentionally hear that the Dawn device was dying, but fate chose them and they both answered the call. And sadly, both of them sacrificed themselves to give the other Flame Chasers a chance to fight the world-ending threat. So I'd say Pardophilus is Cipher, and they are pretty much the same exact character, let's be honest. So after this long journey of explaining just about every single Flame Chaser's connection to Honkai Impact 3rd, I think it is safe to say that this is the true identity of the Flame Chasers revealed. I said I was gonna update the last video, and before the new patch drops, here it is. Finally, nearly all the spots are filled, and I'd say we have enough info on most of them to draw a really strong connection. Just Hyacine and Terravox are really weak so far, and Mobius is MIA, of course. There just has to be a 13th one, right? Something isn't right. Is Hoyo holding out on us again? I think so. But what do you guys think? Be sure to let me know, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace, y'all.